Hi there, I'm going to share a reflection on the scripture readings that have been suggested for today. The one from the Jewish scripture is from Job 38, verse 1 to 7, and verse 34 to 41. And the gospel reading is Mark 10, 35 to 45. So feel free to have a read of those and then come back to the video. I've got my cat sitting here while I'm recording the video, so you might be able to hear him different times, I don't know. For a few weeks we've been hearing from the book of Job, and the story goes that Job was a very rich man and everybody believed he was very good. And so the way that everybody saw it was that he must have been really rich and wealthy because he was so good. It must have been a reward. But there are some shady things that are going on behind the scenes in the court of heaven. God makes an agreement with the devil and allows the devil to do things that we would never think that God would allow. But no one on earth is ever told about what's going on behind the scenes. They just see what has happened to Job. Because in a series of tragedies, Job loses all of his wealth, then all of his children are killed in the one accident, and then he becomes very sick. And he isn't the only one experiencing all of this. His wife is experiencing it too. And she's a lot more angry with God than Job is. She wishes that Job would express his anger at God for what's happened to him. But Job's not willing to say a word against God. In the wake of so much loss, they're no longer able to be there for each other. Job sits in ashes, grieving and picking at the sores that have appeared all over his body. And he has friends who come and sit with him for a while, but eventually Job starts to question God about why this has all happened. And the friends aren't able to listen to this. They rebuke Job for questioning God, and they tell him that he must have sinned and somehow brought this all upon himself. Job isn't convinced by what they're saying and pleads with God to turn up and explain. That's when we hear the response from God in today's reading. God challenges Job to consider the wonders of creation, clouds and storms and lightning, like we've been experiencing in this part of the world the last few days. And he challenges him to consider and marvel at the wild creatures, the lions and the crows and eagles and ostriches, mountain goats and the great creatures of the sea. Do you think that Job would be comforted by this? I don't think Job would be comforted by this. But I think there's something going on here. At the same time that I've been thinking about this, I've been reflecting on the kids' picture book by Maurice Sendak, Where the Wild Things Are. In Where the Wild Things Are, Max dresses up as a wolf. There's something in him that is like a wild animal. He has anger and aggression and wildness inside him. He's learning to express and inhabit those emotions. Maurice Sendak, who wrote and illustrated this book, was from a Polish Jewish family, a family who had lived through persecution and escaped to the United States. So his family knew a lot of suffering and sadness, like Job. He had a lot of relatives who didn't survive, who didn't live through the Holocaust. Sendak said that when he was illustrating the wild things in the book, he was thinking about his relatives, people who'd been through a lot of suffering, like Job had. I think there's something about Job that is like the wild animals. God asks Job to explain the mysteries of the wild animals, but Job is equally mysterious and wild. He's not mastered by his suffering. He persists in his determined and questioning faith. He demands an audience and an answer from God. He keeps on living defiantly. He's just as wild and untamable as the other creatures that God has made. This is how God has made us. But as we've become advanced and as we've attempted to conquer and control the earth, we might have lost touch with the wildness of the earth and the wildness that God has planted inside us. I think the animals have something to teach us about how to survive in a wild world, a world where we're not in control. If there's a feeling that we're struggling with, maybe there's an animal that could help us with that feeling. We might be finding it hard to cope with grief or loneliness or pain or anxiety or anger. We might be wishing that we could experience calm in our hearts when we're not able to. We might be finding that good things happen, but we don't experience joy that we would have expected. Animals don't have to think about how to access these feelings. They just do what's needed, just do what's appropriate without thinking. If we have trouble connecting with grief, the elephants might help us to connect with grief. Grief is the pain of loss, especially when somebody has died, and we might physically feel it in our bodies, but we might struggle to express it. But it seems like elephants experience grief. They've been seen returning in groups to the remains of other elephants who they've known and standing around the body together, caressing the bones, with tears flowing from the glands that are behind their eyes. If it's hard for us to connect with grief, we might be able to learn from the elephants. We might be able to imagine being an elephant who knows in their body how to express grief and does so without the thinking getting in the way. We might even try walking about like a grieving elephant or making the sound of a grieving elephant. There's so many feelings that might be difficult for us for different reasons, but maybe there are animals that could help us with those feelings. We live in a wild world full of fierce and wild and frightening things, but we also have been made by the same one who made the wild storms and floods and beasts and birds. God's made us with the same wild freedom that lives in the rest of nature. Being attentive to the animals and the earth might help us to contend with the wildness and the chaos of it, might help us to connect with our own wildness. In his very recent book, Wild Creature Mind, Steve Biddulph, who is an Australian psychologist, says that our society is having so much trouble with anxiety because we've lost touch with the part of our minds that instinctively knows how to deal with difficulty. We're very immersed in rational thinking parts of our minds, the parts that search for solutions and that work out plans for keeping things in order and under control so that things don't get difficult. But it means we're not very in touch with the parts that help us to live through difficulty. Things go wrong, and things go terribly wrong, because God has made the world wild, and the creatures of the world, including us, have the freedom to do as they will. We have the freedom to exploit the earth and the seas and our fellow creatures. But we need to be wary of the earth's wild response as well. Storms, floods, fires. Because of the way that we've treated the earth, things are going to be hard, but we're still wild creatures. We can be in touch with the wildness that God has given us. It can help us to contend with difficulty. In the New Testament, God's response to our difficulty is to come and join us in our human experience, discovering what it's like to live a human life. That's how God reconciles with us, by living a human life with all of the joy and pain and dying, just like we do. In today's reading from Mark, the brothers James and John expect that Jesus is going to put himself above everyone and that they'll get to be his second in command. But Jesus isn't there to put himself in command to try and control everything. He's come among us on our level, becoming a creature just like us, joining us in the good things and in the difficulties.